Welcome to this explainer. It is absolutely wild to look back at the history books and realize that at one very specific point in time, the literal only thing standing between an entire nation and total destruction was a commander missing his right arm and blind in one eye. I mean, you can't write this stuff. Today, we're unpacking the incredibly high-stakes reality of Horatio Nelson. He's the British admiral whose tactical brilliance at the Battle of Trafalgar didn't just win a fight, it forever changed the course of global history. Okay, let's dive into this. How exactly did a man missing two vital appendages, a guy who realistically should have been sitting on a very comfortable pension somewhere, completely dismantle the most powerful combined navy in Europe? To really grasp the sheer magnitude of this ultimate underdog scenario, we've got to look at the unbreakable mindset that he forged over decades out there on the open water. Nelson's entire life was, quite literally, built on the sea. Born in 1758, he didn't waste any time. At just 12 years old, 12, he joins the Royal Navy, and he quickly builds this massive reputation for taking bold, calculated risks. But that kind of bravery came with a staggering physical toll. We're talking a permanent loss of sight in his right eye during combat, and then later on, the amputation of his right arm. Now that is the kind of severe physical trauma that would send almost anyone packing into early retirement, right? Not Nelson. He flat out refused to quit, because his ultimate tactical showdown, the defining moment of his life, was still waiting for him in October of 1805. And that showdown, of course, was against Napoleon Bonaparte. By the early 1800s, Napoleon's armies were just this unstoppable juggernaut rolling across continental Europe. But his grand strategy had one massive watery bottleneck: the English Channel. To launch a full-scale invasion of Britain, Napoleon absolutely had to eliminate the Royal Navy. So Nelson and his battered, weather-worn fleet were the single, fragile barrier preventing a complete French invasion. Talk about pressure. Now, what's really interesting about this matchup is the terrifying mathematical reality Nelson faced off Cape Trafalgar. The disparity is just staggering. Nelson is commanding 27 British ships, and he's staring down a massive, combined fleet of 33 French and Spanish warships. He is vastly outnumbered, he's outgunned, and he's facing an enemy that is absolutely desperate to clear the path for their emperor. If Nelson plays it safe here, relying on standard naval tactics, he almost certainly loses, just by sheer numbers. So, Nelson throws the rulebook completely out the window. Step 1, he divides his fleet into 2 columns. Now step 2, and it is genuinely horrifying to actually visualize this, instead of sailing alongside the enemy in traditional parallel lines, he orders his columns to sail perpendicularly. Right, straight at them. Because of the wind that day, the British ships were moving at this painfully slow walking pace. For miles, literally miles, they just sailed straight into enemy cannon fire without being able to shoot back. It was an agonizing gamble. But if they could just survive that approach, it would trigger step 3, breaking through the enemy line to force chaotic, brutal, close-range combat. Can you even imagine the anxiety on those British ships? Slowly drifting into the enemy's sights, unable to return fire. The sailors knew exactly how overwhelming the danger was. So to steady his men during this agonizingly slow approach, Nelson ordered a message to be communicated via signal flags across the entire fleet. And it remains one of the most legendary quotes in military history. England expects that every man will do his duty. It wasn't some demand for personal glory. It was a profound call to shared responsibility. It anchored the men right as enemy cannonballs began to physically smash through their wooden hulls. And, amazingly, his unbelievably bold gamble works. The British ships finally pierce the French and Spanish lines, and all those neat, organized warfare rules just disintegrate. The battle devolves into this massive, hours-long, close-quarters brawl. And in this intense, chaotic environment, Nelson's strategy proves brilliantly lethal. The superior British gunnery, specifically their remarkably fast reload speeds, and their unmatched seamanship, absolutely devastate the combined enemy fleet. Nelson's aggressive, in-your-face tactics were systematically tearing Napoleon's navy apart. But as the battle reaches its absolute peak, Nelson is pacing the open deck of his flagship HMS Victory. He's fully exposed, wearing his full admiral's uniform. And high up in the rigging of a nearby French ship, the Redoutable, a marksman spots him. A shot rings out. It strikes Nelson in the shoulder and lodges deep in his spine. He immediately collapses. The commander who had already given so much of himself to the Royal Navy is carried below deck into the surgeon's quarters. And there, surrounded by the muffled roaring of the ongoing battle above him, Horatio Nelson slowly begins to die. He lingers for hours in immense pain,
but he's fighting to stay alive for one very specific reason. He desperately needs to know the outcome. Finally, his officers bring him the news. The enemy fleet has surrendered. The battle is a resounding, historic victory, and Britain is safe. Having achieved the seemingly impossible, Nelson finally lets go. His reported final words perfectly echo the signal he sent to his men just hours earlier. "Thank God I have done my duty."
So the crucial point is this: the Battle of Trafalgar was not just a naval skirmish. It was the exact fulcrum upon which global history pivoted. By destroying that combined fleet, Nelson permanently prevented Napoleon from ever invading Britain. But honestly, the impact went way beyond that. It secured absolute British control of the oceans. It protected global trade routes, which directly allowed the British Empire to rapidly expand its influence worldwide. That single, bloody afternoon established a period of total Royal Navy dominance that lasted for more than a century.
And this brings us to why Nelson's approach to leadership is still so heavily studied today, from military academies to corporate boardrooms. He didn't micromanage. He deeply trusted his subordinate commanders and actively encouraged initiative over rigid obedience, which, by the way, was an incredibly disruptive concept for 19th century warfare. He led from the front, he shared the exact same dangers as his men, and he made the boldest possible decisions right when everyone else would have hesitated. He empowered his team, and they rewarded him with extraordinary loyalty.
It is no wonder at all that his legacy is honored on such a massive scale today. If you visit Trafalgar Square in London, you'll see Nelson's column towering over 50 meters, that's about 169 feet, into the sky, forever looking out over the nation he saved. And incredibly, his flagship, HMS Victory, the very place where he fought and died, has been beautifully preserved. It's still sitting there today as one of the world's most famous historic warships, a tangible, real-life piece of that fateful day in 1805. Horatio Nelson sacrificed his life, but his tactical brilliance and unparalleled courage achieved the absolute impossible. So let me leave you with this final thought to consider. We live in an age that often prioritizes extremely cautious, play-it-safe planning. But what could you achieve in your own life or in your career by adopting a bit of Nelson's strategy? What happens when you deeply trust your team, step out from the back to lead from the front, and take bold, calculated risks when everyone else is just playing it safe? Think about it. Thanks for joining me on this explainer, and I'll catch you on the next one.